today from Canto 5, Chapter 10. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chevam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirate Nashtapraya Shivabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtaki. So we are reading from Canto 5, The Creative Impetus, Chapter 10, titled The Discussion Between Jad Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana, verses 1 to 12, text 1. Sukhdev Goswami continued, My dear king, after this, King Rahugana, ruler of the states known as Sindhu and Suvara, was going to Kapilashram when the king's chief palanquin carriers reached the banks of the river Ikshumati. They needed another carrier, therefore they began searching for someone, and by chance they came upon Jar Bharat. They considered the fact that Jad Bharat was very young and strong and had firm limbs like cows and asses. He was quite fit to carry loads. Thinking in this way, although the great soul, Jad Bharat was unfit for such work, they nonetheless unhesitatingly forced him to carry the palanquin. Text 2. The palanquin, however, was very erratically carried by Jarbharat due to his sense of non-violence. As he stepped forward, he checked before him every 3 feet to see whether he was about to step on ants. Consequently, he could not keep pace with other carriers. Due to this, the palanquin was shaking the king, and King Rahugana immediately asked the carrier, Why are you carrying this palanquin unevenly? Better carry it properly. Text 3. When the palanquin carriers heard the threatening words of Maharaj Rahugana, they became very afraid of his punishment and began to speak to him as follows. Text 4. O Lord, please note that we are not at all negligent in discharging our duty. We have been faithfully carrying this palanquin according to your desire, but this man who has been recently engaged to work with us cannot walk very swiftly, therefore we are not able to carry the palanquin with him. Text 5. King Rahugana could understand the speeches given by the carriers who were afraid of being punished. He could also understand that simply due to the fault of one person, the palanquin was not being carried properly. Knowing this perfectly well and hearing their appeal, he became a little angry, although he was very advanced in political science and was very experienced. His anger arose due to his unborn nature as a king. Actually, King Rahugana's mind was covered by the mode of passion, and he therefore spoke as follows to Jar Bharat, whose Brahman effulgence was not clearly visible, being covered like a fire covered by ashes. Text 6. King Rahugana told Jar Bharat, How troublesome this is, my dear brother. You certainly appear very fatigued because you have carried this palanquin alone without assistance for a long time and for a long distance. Besides that, due to your old age, you have become greatly troubled, my dear friend. I see that you are now not very firm, not very strong and stout, and your fellow carriers cooperating with you. Text 7. Thereafter, when the king saw that his palanquin was still being shaken by the carriers, he became very angry and said, You rascal, what are you doing? You are dead despite the life within your body. Do you not know that I am your master? You are disregarding me and are not carrying out my order. For this disobedience, I shall now punish you just as Yamraj, the superintendent of death, punishes sinful people. I shall give you proper treatment so that you will come to your senses and do not correct thing. Text 8. Thinking himself a king, King Rahugana was in the bodily conception and was influenced by material nature's modes of passion and ignorance. Due to madness, he chastised Javarat with uncalled for and uncontradictory words. Javarat was the topmost devotee and dear abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although considering himself very learned, the king did not know about the position of an advanced devotee situated in devotional service, nor did he know his characteristics. Javarat was the residence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He always carried the form of the Lord within his heart. He was the dear friend of all living beings, and he did not entertain any bodily conception. He therefore smiled and spoke the following words. Text 9. The great Brahmana Jarbharata said, "My dear king and hero, whatever you have spoken sarcastically is certainly true. Actually, these are not simply words of chastisement for you, for the body is the carrier. The load carried by the body does not belong to me, for I am the spirit soul. There is no contradiction in your statements because I am different from the body. I am not the carrier of the palanquin. The body is the carrier. Certainly, as you have hinted, I have not labored carrying a palanquin, for I am detached from the body. You have said that I am not stout and strong, and these words are befitting a person who does not know the distinction between the body and the soul. The body may be far or thin, but no learned man would say such things of it, of the spirit soul. As far as the spirit soul is concerned, I am neither fat nor skinny. Therefore, you are correct when you say that I am not very stout. Also, if the object of this journey and the path leading there were mine, there would be many troubles for me. But because they relate not to me, but to my body, there is no trouble at all. uh, fit, Fatness, thinness, bodily and mental, distress, thirst, hunger, fear, disagreement, desire for material happiness, old age, sleep, attachment for material possessions, anger, lamentation, illusion, and identification of the body with the self are all transformations of the material covering of the spirit soul. A person absorbed in the material body conception is affected by these things, but I am free from all bodily conceptions. Consequently, I am neither fat nor skinny, nor anything else you have mentioned. Text 11. My dear king, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead, though alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere because everything material has its fit beginning and end. As far as you're thinking that you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me, this is also incorrect because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant. Tomorrow the position may be changed and you may be my servant and I your master. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. The last text of the day, text 12, my dear king. If you still think that you are the king and that I am your servant, you should order me and I should follow your order. I can then say that this differentiation is temporary and it expands only from usage of or convention. Convention. I do not see any other cause in that case. Who is the master and who is the servant? Everyone is being forced by the law of material nature. Therefore, no one is master and no one is servant. Nonetheless, if you think that you are the master and that I am the servant, I shall accept this. Please order me. What can I do for you? Thank you so much for this reading opportunity. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Overview to you, Prabhuji, Chaitanya, Charan Das, Prabhuji. Please take over. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mate.
Hare Krishna, devotees. Just accept my humble obeisances. Thank you, Sri Hari Radhe Mataji, for reading our translations today.
Thank you, Sundaran Prabhu, for giving this opportunity to share something from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 10. For my own purification, for the pleasure of all assembled Vaishnavas, we'll begin a discussion today on Canto 5, Chapter 10, text 1 to 12. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामीते नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हम करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्री गुरुदीन तारणम्। Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So, just to give you a brief background before we begin our discussion today. So, in the previous few chapters of Canto 5, we've been reading about the lineage of Maharaj Rishabhdev, Lord Rishabhdev, and we are talking about his eldest son, Bharat Maharaj, who was a very exemplary king. And, when appropriate time came, he left up his family and kingdom, dedicate his life into devotional service. And while he was practicing to advance himself in spiritual life, how he got entangled by attraction with the deer, how he gave up his body thinking of a deer, but then realized his mistake. And after living through a life with the deer's body, he again takes birth as Jada Bharat. So as in this body in this third lifetime as a Jad Bharat, he would appear as mute and dumb, so that he would not have to have much interaction with this material world. And that's why he was subjected to a lot of misery and ridicule from people around him. And we read from yesterday's discussion how people try to take unfair advantage of him, and they wanted to prosecute him and sacrifice him, and how even the demigods, they come to protect the devotees. We read about Mother Kali, how coming to protect Jadabharat. So with that, the discussion continues. So once upon a time, there was a king. His name was Maharaj Rahugana, and he was the ruler of the states, which was known as Sindhu and Sauvira. So this particular king, he was traveling to Kapil Ashram, and when they reached the banks of the river, he was traveling on a palanquin. They needed another carrier. So while they were looking for another carrier, his associates looked around and they found Jadabharat sitting by the side of the road. And he was very young and strong, and they thought, yes, just like cows and asses, he's quite fit to carry heavy loads. So they, unhesitatingly forced him to carry the palanquin for the king as the fourth attendant. Now, when he was carrying Jadabharat, because he was full of compassion for all living entities, he had a sense of non-violence. And whenever an ant, he would always look 3 feet ahead of himself. And whenever an ant would come, he would stop and let the ant pass so as to not trouble the ant, even the small insects that were coming on his path. Now, when four people are moving, carrying a palanquin, if one person all of a sudden keeps stopping, the palanquin will be shaking because the balance is not distributed evenly. When this happened, King Rahugana immediately gets angry and says, "No, what is happening? Make sure you carry this palanquin carefully." So, what we learn from Srila Prabhupada's purports in these two verses is there are two principles. One is that a Vaishnava, he never forgets his principles of devotional service, even in the most distressful situation. So even though he was being forced to carry the palanquin by the order of the king's associates, and the terror of of serving the king and being ridiculed by him, as a Vaishnava, he wanted to make sure he doesn't hurt any living entity in any situation. So he was able to carry this out and practice non-violence even in this particular predicament. The second thing Prabhupada describes, what Kapil Muni mentions in Sankhya Yoga, is Suridam Sarvadehinam, that a devotee, Vaishnava, is always the eternal well-wisher of each and every living entity. Srila Prabhupada used to write letters to his disciples. He always used to write, "Your eternal well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada," because a Vaishnava has compassion and care for any living entity in this world, understanding each and every one to be part and parcel of Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. So also devotees, they do not care if the patient, if the person's bodies are different, if they're an animal body, insect body, but they always understand that ultimately we are not the body, we are the soul, and they display compassion towards us. However, non-devotees, Prabhupada mentions, they only show compassion or sympathy for humans. A lot of people give this argument that only humans have souls, but the animals, they don't have souls like us. But by common sense, we can understand there are multiple similarities that are there between the humans and the animal kingdom. There's only certain subtle differences, but the basic needs of the soul are there in each and every living entity. That's why those people who are materialistically so inclined, they when they say that they love a dog and they say they love chicken, that does not always mean the same thing. When they say they love a dog, they would hug them, play with them, tickle them, and pet them and keep them happy, do anything to make them happy. But when they say they love chicken, then they would kill it and devour it and cause it so much pain and suffering. But a devotee, when he says he loves every living entity, it is love for the eternal soul. Moving on to text 3. When the palanquin carriers they heard the threatening words of Maharaj Raghugana, they became afraid of his punishment and began to speak. So Prabhupada describes a very small tenant that he describes in the purport for this shloka about something that's taken from, also mentioned in Chanakya Niti in the Artha Shastra. So when the king, Prabhupada describes, needs to take care of his praja, of his subordinates, he has to make sure that even in unpalatable situations, the rule of the law has to prevail. So if somebody is not listening and we're in an unfavorable situation, how we should approach that. An example of that is given in the Shastra. So the principle, which is a principle of political science, let's mention, is called Sam, Dan, Dand, Bhed. So Chanakya Pandit describes that. So if somebody, so if take an example of a child. If a child or a teenager growing up, and you have to explain something that they're doing wrong, so the first thing you do is try to sit down with them and negotiate with them, talk to them, help them understand what is right, what is wrong, and what they are doing, what the consequences of that will be. And hopefully, that should be enough for those individuals to understand and take course correction of whatever they're doing. But if Sam doesn't work, the next process people try is Dan. So Dan means giving gifts, so giving incentives. So if somebody is not able to follow something, then sometimes we give incentives like, hey, if you clean your room today, you're going to get this thing as a reward, or something like that. So we try to incentivize them to follow the right thing. If that also doesn't work, then the third thing that is done is danda, that is punishment. So then if you don't do such and such a thing, you keep doing this inappropriate behavior, then you may get such and such punishment. And the last thing is bheda. So even after encouraging, incentivizing, giving punishments, if a person still is not able to follow the right path, then sometimes you may have to separate themselves from you, or you may ostracize themselves so that they're able to understand that if they need to function as a part of society, then they need to follow the rules and regulations. That principle is very briefly mentioned by Prabhupada. So what did the other palanquin bearers say? So they immediately, they put Jada Bharat, what we say, under the bus. They say, we have been faithfully carrying this palanquin, sir, according to your desire. But this man, who we recently engaged to work with us, he cannot walk swiftly. Therefore, it is his fault that the palanquin is shaking. Now, what Prabhupada says in the purport, highlights in this verse, is the nature of a living entity. So we understand, Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Tatur Varnam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. So there are four Varnas, and the Varnas, the Bhaga, the division of the Varnas are based on Guna and Karma. So, because the other palanquin bearers were of a Shudra Varna, they always just thought of their own welfare and not welfare of others. They did not care if an ant or insect or somebody else was being um, was being going through suffering because of their mistakes or their actions. But Jada Bharat was not like that. He was a Brahmana. Being a Brahmana, he always maintained compassion towards all the living entities. So one cannot separate one's nature or quality from a living entity. And that is what describes the Varna. Not one's parentage, one's birth, one's elevated lineage, but it is the nature of one living entity, is the psychophysical nature that one person displays during his lifetime is what really determines his Varna. In the Mahabharata, there is another example that comes about this, that when Karna wanted to learn about military science, he finally, after many unsuccessful attempts, approaches Parashuram. And Parashuram, he had taken a vow that he would be only giving education on military science to the Brahmana class. So, in order to, because Karna was actually although born of Mother Kunti, he was being raised by the chariot driver. He was not considered to be a Brahmana class, but not because of his birth, but because of his nature. But he still tried to disguise his nature and appearance and appeared before Parashuram as a Brahmana. So after, while learning military science from Parashuram, there was one particular incident where his nature gave away. And this was when, after an episode of training, Parashuram was taking rest on the lap of Karna. And while he was taking rest on the lap of Karna, an insect came and it bit Karna's thighs, causing a very sharp degree of pain. And when that happened, normally most individuals would just flinch right away or just shake right away and become scared or react to the pain. But Karna, being a Kshatriya by nature, he had the ability to tolerate pain significantly. So much so that that insect was biting and it started causing some bleeding, and blood started trickling down his legs. And when Parashuram was sleeping, he noticed some fluid trickling down his face and irritating him, and his eyes opened, awakened, and he saw there was blood. And he looked around where the blood's coming from, and he realized it's coming from Karna because an insect has bit him. At that moment, he immediately realizes that actually a Brahmana cannot tolerate such degree of pain. So this person, this personality who I've been training, must definitely not be a Brahmana, but a Kshatriya. And then he ridicules him and he curses Karna that all the military science I've taught you, you will forget it the moment you actually need the science. But that goes on to display how a person's karna or guna describes a person's varna, how the other palanquin bearers were separate from Jadabha. In text 5, now after hearing the complaint from the other palanquin bearers, King Rahugana, he immediately got angry. He just with this small instigation, he became angry, and this anger arose because he was of his inborn nature of passion as a king. He therefore spoke as follows to Jadabharat, whose Brahmin effulgence was not clearly visible, being covered like a fire covered by ashes. So Prabhupada describes in this purport that you clearly see the difference between the two in this verse, between the distinction between Rajoguna and Sattvaguna. In the mode of passion, with even the slightest agitation, one can become angry. But one is situated in the mode of goodness, he learns the ability to tolerate provoking situations. Even though Jad Bharat had to face so much ridicule from his brothers, from his villagers, people made fun of him, he never responded in anger because he was situated in the mode of goodness and it was beyond the conception of the body, understanding himself to be the spirit soul. Um, one another point that I recently heard in a lecture um, was that oftentimes when we go through some troublesome situation, we tend to point fingers at other individuals and blame them for a predicament. So if we are angry, if we are envious, and we point fingers at other people and say, it is because of him, he made me angry. It is because of him I made a mistake. So it's actually not me to be blamed, but it's him to be blamed. But the devotee was sharing in that particular lecture that actually the different situations that we are subjected to, even in spiritual life, they're only to bring out our own inert nature in front of us. So, because oftentimes when devotees would go and complain to Srila Prabhupada about, Prabhupada, this devotee did something to me, or this happened with me, and this thing happened and made me angry. Prabhupada used to say a very important point. He used to say, do not blame the agents of your own karma. So oftentimes our own karmic reactions, our own faults will come to us through the agents of people surrounding us. And my wife shared a very nice point, interesting point, that when we take to devotional life, we may still have karma that is left from a previous birth. And because we are surrounded, hopefully, by devotees most of the time, but we still have to face the reactions of the karmas. Sometimes those karmas may come through the devotees. So instead of blaming people around us, we should realize that this is maybe a reaction of our own karma, and this is rightly revealing our own true identity. It is said that we see the world around us based on what our nature is. If our nature is envious, we will see envy in people around us. We'll say, he is envious, that person's envious. But if we understand and realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Paramatma, is also a part and parcel and associated with us in our body, then we will be able to see that in everybody around us. So if we are happy by nature or if we are pure by nature, we will see purity or something good in everybody around us. If we have anger, greed, envy in our heart, we will see that reflected in people around us as well. There's a saying in English that adversity does not build character, it only reveals it. So greatness of a devotee is tested by his ability to tolerate provoking situations. So there are some things in bhakti which act as barometers that tell us, actually where we stand. And one of them is how we tolerate some provoking situations. When somebody comes and ridicules us, scolds us, chastises us, do we take it in a positive manner, or do we react to it and express anger? That tells us how much advanced we are in our bhakti practice, and hopefully allows us to reflect as well. In text 6, now King Rahugana is talking to Jadabharat after listening the complaints of the other palanquin bearers, and he's talking in a very sarcastic way. He makes a lot of sarcastic comments that, oh, you appear fatigued because you are carrying this palanquin alone, which we know he's not carrying it alone, he's carrying it with other three palanquin bearers. And looks like you have become old age and you're very troubled, and you're not strong and stout. Aren't your carriers cooperating with you? So in a very sarcastic way, he's chastising Jadabharat. But actually, Jadabharat doesn't get affected by this, because Jadabharat realizes that he is not the body. So any sarcasm, any criticism that is directed towards the body does not affect Jadabharat. Once upon a time, His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj had shared this, that when he was preaching once in a public event, he was explaining that how we are not the body. We may think we are fat or thin or beautiful, but we are not this body. We are the soul, and the soul is not fat or thin or beautiful. And when he said this, two very overweight Matajis, they came rushing towards him and said, "Oh, we are so happy. Like we've been struggling with this idea and we've been depressed for so long, thinking we are fat. But now we realize that actually we're not this body and we're the soul, and we don't have to think about that." So he was sharing that was a funny incident. Um, so what happens is when we take birth in this material world, we assume a certain identity. So when we are born, we don't really have a name, but we assume a name that's given to us by a family. So we assume that identity. So we assume a certain nationality, being born in a particular country, sometimes as identity of a certain caste. As we grow up, we inherit some other identities as well. So we may have different roles, different relationships, different professions, and we tend to identify ourselves with those. But what we don't realize that these are all like we're taking part in a play. So for example, suppose we're doing a drama. So recently we did a drama on Janmashtami and we had some characters playing the role of monkeys. Suppose we are doing a drama, and the drama we are playing the role of a monkey, and we've all dressed up in the costume, we act like a monkey, we enact our part. And after we finish the drama, we're sitting with everybody and honoring Prasadam. And somebody walks us up to us and says, you know what? Monkeys, they're very nasty creatures. They do this, they do that, they're full of sense gratification, everything. Do we think that we're going to be offended by that particular personality statement? Probably not, because we're all convinced that we're not monkeys. We may even think in our heads that, dear sir, why are you saying all these things to me? We may just ignore him because we realize that this person, although we're wearing a monkey costume, we're 100% convinced we're not a monkey. So we will not give much heed to their comments, either positive or negative. Similarly, when we accept these identities in this material world, we are like playing a part in a play. So when people ridicule us, or they ridicule us based on our material identification, based on our bodily identification, that you're beautiful, you're fat, you're short, or you're a doctor, you're this, you're that. One who truly understands that I am not this body, but I am the spirit soul, is not going to be affected by those things. So similarly, Jada in this particular episode, he is fully convinced that he is not the body, but he is the soul. So even though Maharaj Rahugana is giving him all these sarcastic comments based on his body, Jada is not at all affected by it. Prabhupada says in the purport a phrase, Asango hi ayam purushaha, that anything favorable or mischievous done to the body does not affect the soul. Unfortunately, when we identify ourselves with the body, we tend to get entangled with this style. Now, in text 7 and 8, we see how King Rahugana goes on to ridicule Maharaj Jadabharat again. And we see what his response is. His response again shows a difference, Prabhupada says, between one who is in bodily consciousness and one who is in non bodily consciousness. Um, King Rahugana was identifying himself as a king, and he felt he had the authority to chastise him. But Jarabharat, knowing that he is the soul, was not affected at all by any criticism offered to the material body. Jarabharat, being a Vaishnava, was supremely compassionate to all living entities. He did not bear any enmity in his heart towards the king. So we see the examples of great devotees like Jesus Christ. When he was on the cross, he prayed for the deliverance of all those sinners around him by saying, "Oh Lord, please forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." Similarly, when we read about Haridas Thakur, and he was beaten in 222 different marketplaces, he did not bear any sense of enmity towards the soldiers who were beating him, but he praised to Lord Chaitanya that Lord, please forgive them, for they do not what they're doing. Lord Chaitanya actually comes and protects Haridas Thakur, so he doesn't feel the pain just because of his prayer. So a devotee, a Vaishnava, he doesn't bear any enmity towards anybody around. Even if he displays a little bit of anger, the anger that a devotee displays is only out of compassion for the fallen conditioned soul. In text 9, now Jada begins to speak and he begins his instructions. Now, these instructions and discussions are very wonderful and they actually go on for the next few chapters. So, we're just going to briefly touch upon the introduction to these discussions. So, when Jada starts speaking, one of the first points that we note is he addresses the King Rahugana as my dear king and hero. Whatever you have spoken sarcastically is certainly true. So Prabhupada explains, and I heard this in a recent lecture, that this is the art of preaching. So when you're preaching to somebody who's unfavorable and you want to get their attention, the first thing we should do is sort of try to please them. Once they are pleased, they'll open their hearts to us and they'll give us a little bit of time to maybe hear us out so we can explain things to them. During my preparation for Janmashtami, I was hearing this lecture, and in this lecture there was this description how Kansa, as soon as he hears the voice from the sky that Devaki's eighth son is going to be his demise, he immediately grabs Devaki's hair and raises his sword in order to kill her. So the situation becomes unfavorable very quickly, and Vasudev the way he responds to it, we can learn something from it. So he immediately glorifies Kansa. He says, "Oh, you are the prime prince of the Bhoj dynasty, and you are such a wonderful king, wonderful soldier. And doing this or hurting a woman does not befit you." So as soon as he hears these words of glorification from Vasudev, Kans immediately lowers his sword and starts to give a ear out to what Vasudev is going to say. So that similar way, when Jadabharat, he wanted to instruct King Rahugana, he glorifies him initially so that he's able to open his heart out and lend his ear to him so that he's able to discuss some spiritual topics with him. And he goes on to say that you're actually absolutely right. Everything you described, I am not that. I'm not strong. I'm not old. I'm not fat because I am the spirit soul. So all that you're saying is actually, sir, is really true because one who's advanced in spiritual knowledge is not disturbed by pains and pleasures of this body. In text 10, goes on to describe this. The purport to this text is very important. So, if any devotees have time today, I would recommend reading the purport to text 10. Prabhupada describes that one who is spiritually advanced has no connection with the body. The bodily conception is what entangles one into the material world. So, just like the example I shared previously, that if we understand that we are only playing part in this world, in a role in the play, in the drama of life, then we'll be free from this. So instead of taking these different identities that we have, the name that's given to us at birth, our spiritual master actually gives us our real identity. So for in my case, my Guru Maharaj, he gave me this understanding that I'm not Dr. Mishra. I'm not Indian. I'm not that. But actually, I'm a Das. I'm a Das of Chaitanya Candra, the most munificent incarnation. Um, and my real identity is to be a servant of a servant and to please him. Rest everything else that I do is just because I have to do because I'm in this material body. But my real identity will always be in this loving devotional service. Um, in the Prabhupada describes in the Bhagavatam, humans who are in this bodily consciousness are described as Dvipad Pashu, Pashu with two-legged animals. But the role of Krishna consciousness movement, Prabhupada boldly claims, is to raise people from this bodily consciousness to spiritual consciousness. And how it's done, it's not done instantly, but it's done gradually over a period of time. Um, Prabhupada quotes the Bhagavatam Shlok 1.2.18, Nashtaprayashu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. By Nityam, by regularly attending these wonderful sessions of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, we can gradually elevate our consciousness from a bodily platform to spiritual platform. In text 11, we go on to discuss more a little bit about this bodily conception. Jarabharat talks to King Rahugana that one who is in this bodily consciousness continues to suffer because he only thinks that there is one lifetime. He doesn't realize that the soul, the living entity, can never be killed and has to take birth again and again. Sometimes he may be the king, sometimes he may be the servant. In fact, we know by arrangement of providence in this particular pastime, Jada Bharat, or who was Bharat Maharaj in his previous birth and was the king of this whole universe, is now being chastised by a king of a small province, King Rahugana. And the providence can change or flip our situations at any time. The one who understands that he is a living entity soul is not affected by these. In the last shloka for today, King Jada goes on to describe that it is only under the influence of Maya that we think we are the controller. Actually, to our desires, we are forced to take up different bodies based on our desires. And based on these desires, we begin to think we are the Ishvara, we are the controller. But Chaitanya Charitamrita describes that the only Ishvara is Ekale Ishvara Krishna, Ara Sababhritya. Rest everybody else is only meant to please the Supreme Personality of God. The only controller is the Supreme Personality of God, Shri Krishna. And when we take shelter of Lord Krishna, then we're able to come out of this material covering. All right, your devotees, thank you for your time today. We're a little bit over time. Stop my discussion here. Panchakalpatarubhyascha, Pasandubhya Ivacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। हरे कृष्ण।
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhu.